So one of the movies that I was most excited about when I went to the Toronto International Film Festival was Guns Akimbo. And if that doesn't sound familiar, this viral photo of Daniel Radcliffe, also known as Harry Potter, wearing a bathrobe, underwear, and giant fuzzy tiger slippers with guns screwed to his hands might jog your memory. And I was so looking forward to making so many Harry Potter and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad date jokes, but now we're here. So the story itself follows Miles, a programmer who spends most of his time trolling trolls online with an affinity for a particular site that live streams death fights. The creators of the site kind of get tired of this and ultimately orchestrate Miles' own death game, and that's where the absurdity kicks off. And after the events I'll be talking about today, I kind of wonder if Jason, the director, sees himself as Miles or unintentionally wrote himself into the Miles character. But yeah, when I finally saw the movie, it was essentially everything I assumed it would be. It's an off-the-walls, crazy, violent, ridiculous movie with an underlying message about the anonymity of online behavior, keyboard courage, and the dangers of lack of accountability when it comes to trolling and targeted harassment. That's obviously a very hot topic right now. It's only gonna get worse, and we're constantly juggling the line between calling people out to hold them accountable and the times where it goes further than that. So imagine my surprise when Jason Lee Howden, writer and director of Guns Akimbo, gets involved in an already disastrous situation on Twitter and tried to stop bullying by bullying, effectively resulting in a massive critic solidarity push not to cover the film. Let me explain. So I don't want to go too heavy into the issue that started this all off. There's a lot of nuance there. There's a lot of really great articles and firsthand accounts about that. But the main points is that the editor of Much Ado About Cinema had an old message leak where she appears to have used a racial slur. And this was back in 2016. She claimed that the photo was fabricated before ultimately apologizing for doing it. Now at this point, the situation turned into a massive cluster. A slew of people started to pile onto her, going the typical route of the Twitter troll. But there were obviously a lot of people trying to have constructive conversations about the situation, discuss issues with the apology, and look for accountability. It was also around this time that most of the Much Ado staff writers chose to step down from their positions due to this incident, and some of them cited past behaviors. So this editor had been quite vocal about some of her personal issues and suicidal thoughts that she'd had in the past. So everything kind of came to a head when she posted 3 Twitter videos that kind of indicated that she might have attempted to take her life. Thankfully, many people jumped into action after these videos were posted, including those that chose to leave the publication, and she was taken to the hospital. Now enter Jason Lee Howden, destroyer of Twitter trolls. So obviously we should all know by now that wishing death on people and telling them to kill themselves is wrong. But that there's also a major difference between blind hate, taking joy in someone else's pain, and attempting to have a conversation about something and hold people accountable. Sadly, the former happens on the internet way too much. You can disagree with somebody on a movie and they'll tell you to kill yourself, so that's kind of just sadly the world we're in right now. But Jason wanted people to know that internet bullying and harassment are the worst possible things a person can do. And he went about showing this by bullying and harassing people. This wasn't just a blanket statement against the horrible garbage people that were telling this woman to die, that were extensively harassing her. He was actively taking part in targeted harassment against people who literally did nothing remotely close to that. Literally linked a list of people who said they were stepping down, leaving their source of income, and in many of these situations, their only foot in the door at an industry that's incredibly difficult to break into, and claimed that they had encouraged her suicide attempt simply by choosing not to work for her anymore and removing themselves from a situation. Nobody should be called a murderer because they wanted to remove themselves from a situation. So here are some of the fine tweets from Jason kind of going over this situation. Fuck woke cyberbullies. You are just trolls with added hypocrisy. At least trolls admit they are pieces of shit. Woke cyberbullies actually delude themselves into thinking they're good people. Blocking anyone who joined the Much Ado About Film pylon, which is Much Ado About Cinema, whatever. Pathetic. Boycotting film sites who employ these bullying hack writers too. So obviously that kicked off a lot of things, and we started seeing articles of people, talking out about Jason and how his reaction to the situation was kind of misinformed and ill-guided, and how he was actually causing harm to these oftentimes very young writers who were just trying to do the best for their own lives. So he actually tweeted out a list of all those writers. So here they are. The names have been blocked out, obviously just to continue to protect them. And then eventually enough of the backlash of people being like, what are you doing? Most of these people were actually involved in getting her help once they saw those videos she posted. They did not try to kill her. They did not send any hate her way. They just said they were leaving the publication. So obviously once that heat came down, he said, I deleted those names, but still feel strongly that those writers are terrible people. The private DM that was maliciously leaked was obviously an ironic joke. Can't believe anyone would think she was being serious. Like, I'm sorry that you think they're terrible people for removing themselves from a situation that they know more about than you because they actively work with this person. That doesn't mean you can get away with doing the exact same thing you're trying to condemn to other people. He'd also go on to say things like, one last thought on this, I've received a barrage of hate and vitriol for this tweet by the same trolls who pushed that film writer to suicide. Woke cyberbullies are the absolute worst people on Twitter. I'm disengaging from the discourse and hope those responsible get help. And obviously after that last tweet, a lot of people started pointing out, like, I think we should have a conversation about it. I think discourse is valuable. So one of the people who got in on this is someone named Valerie Complex, who just said, so saying the N-word as a joke is excusable. No one should be saying the N-word at all, even in jest. What is wrong with you? You're honestly no better than any other bully because you are one. Congratulations. And then he comes back with, let's see your DMs. I bet there is worse. Hypocrite. That makes me want to see Jason's DMs a little bit, actually. And then Robert Daniels, who ended up writing a pretty insightful piece about his experience in this whole situation, wrote, this really isn't the way. For one, you don't know these writers, many of whom work for other esteemed publications who are actually very good people. Moreover, you're arguing with a black person over the use of the N-word is highly questionable at best. You gonna pile on me now? Bring it on. Like, he just tried to double down and make himself the victim. So what I've learned in this from Jason is that it's okay to harass people and send them hate as long as they don't agree with you. So like I said, he ultimately ends up saying he was wrong for tweeting out the names, but he still held them accountable. But then he went completely left field. He started to target two black writers who were simply looking to have discussions about the situation, calling them murderers and harassers, even though they did nothing of the sort and were not involved in that original situation. They basically just started criticizing Jason's behavior in the matter, and then he started just taking that and morphing it into, these are the people that are responsible for this woman trying to kill herself. Neither one of them was involved in the harassment. They just wrote articles discussing the situation and tried to counter and criticize what Jason was saying on Twitter, much of which were blatant lies. The article by Dark Lady Sky actually had multiple areas hoping for redemption and talking about how, and I quote, bullying is not synonymous with criticism and calling out. The goal of bullying is to destroy. The goal of calling out and criticizing is to improve. And I agree with that. Again, this article was mostly critical to Jason's behavior, and that's one of the people he targeted and claimed were attempted murderers. And if you don't believe me, here's an example of that. These toxic, disgusting film writers bullied from Much Ado About Cinema until she attempted suicide. Remember their names. Bullying must stop. Cyberbullying. They didn't. They were not involved in that situation. And what you are doing right now is very dangerous, is extremely dangerous to try to pin something like that on two people who had nothing to do with the situation just because they're disagreeing with you on Twitter. It's ridiculous. So ridiculous and gross. And there still has not been an apology there. Let's continue on. Jason, you have to stop. And then he says, you're a bully and a troll, and you need to be reported for attempted murder. He's calling people attempted murderers because they're talking out against him. So at some point he actually locked his Twitter, then deactivated it, but don't worry. He quickly just started using the movie's official Twitter account to go at people instead. Now a bunch of these ended up getting deleted before I could screenshot them, but I saw so many different things. Here's one directed at one of those authors I just previously mentioned, talking about the situation that said, troll article from someone who cyberbullied a woman until she attempted suicide. I hope Medium knows you attempted murder with online bullying. Again, they did not do that. They were not involved in that situation. What is wrong with you, Jason? I really just want to know what the logic was there. It's not like your main account was suspended, so you just started letting out with the movie account in frustration. You chose to remove your main account from the conversation and then further link your unreleased movie's Twitter accounts to a situation where you were just so horrifically in the wrong. Like, no one is going to argue with you about the fact that, people telling other people to kill themselves, to die, to just piling on hate is not an okay thing to do. Nobody's gonna argue with you there. But you directing it at people who literally didn't do anything is so wrong. And the irony is that you're doing the exact same thing that you've been trying to condemn, and I don't understand how you don't see that. At this point, you've blindly called for hate against people who simply chose to remove themselves from a situation, and after apologizing for that, but still acknowledging that you think they're horrible people, redirecting your hate train at two writers who actually had nothing to do with that initial situation, and then using your movie's official Twitter account to do it? So again, there were some tweets deleted, some temporary account deactivating, and then on Monday morning, he pops back up with an apology, but more specifically, a non-apology. So he says, "Hey all, just wanted to set the record straight. My posts were only meant to be about bullying. I don't support blank's DM. Racism is not acceptable in any context. I respect the two aforementioned writers' work, but not bullying. My mother committed suicide after a lengthy period of being bullied, which I didn't know about until it was too late. To see others doing the same is incredibly painful and unnecessary. Guns Akimbo is about putting a torch to online bullying. Ironic. I'm sorry to everyone I offended. That was not my intent." You didn't apologize to them. You basically still made it sound like you thought that they had bullied this person when they didn't. Now, a lot of people assume that somebody in PR encouraged this to happen because while all this was happening, obviously multiple movie outlets, critics, and reviewers had made the choice not to cover the film and were being pretty vocal about that fact. Now, obviously, without any details, it's horrible that his mother took her own life under those circumstances. And I understand that that adds a layer of defensiveness there, but it doesn't excuse lying about people and harassing them and tagging their employers because they don't agree with you. So this is when things start to get tricky. There's always the debate around something like this, that when it comes to films, like hundreds of people have worked on them, it's not fair for them to call a boycott. But I'd argue that it was Jason being unfair to the people involved in this movie by choosing to go on this misguided tirade against individuals who literally had nothing to do with the behavior that he's criticizing, while simultaneously encouraging the same behavior that he's trying to call out. And again, using the movie's official Twitter to do it. If you want to see the movie, that doesn't make you a bad person. I know a lot of people are waiting until they can watch it somewhere for free rather than giving the project any money. I'm a pretty firm believer that a lot of art can transcend the personal beliefs or behaviors of a person. For example, Orson Scott Card has a ton of beliefs that I don't remotely agree with, but I think his books speak to a much more open mind than he seems to have. And obviously it can be different when it's just like an actor or somebody involved behind the scenes, but when it's like the writer, the director, and the person who has the most to lose and the most to gain by the success or failure of a film, I can understand the solidarity of not covering the movie when the director was the one who went on a harassment campaign. And again, these are just the things that people managed to screenshot. He was going at people who were just negatively reviewing the film over the weekend if they had already seen it, which I guess is actually fairly normal behavior for him. I'll link the article down below, but I guess with his last film, Deathgasm, Jason went on another Twitter tear-up against Drunk in a Graveyard, a metal and horror-themed blog, which essentially aligns perfect with something like Deathgasm. But I guess the dudes at Drunk in a Graveyard were not actually huge on Deathgasm, despite praise it had been receiving in other places, and they made some light-hearted comments on Twitter about the film's overuse of dick jokes, which apparently was just way too much for Jason to handle. Here's Jason talking about the artistic magnitude of the dick joke. So many missed opportunities for metal inside jokes that could have replaced some of these tiresome dick jokes. Hashtag Deathgasm. Pretty basic, pretty simple, nothing too horrible. Jason comes back with, "The earliest forms of comedy originated and evolved from those who lead off the phallic processions. Basically, dick jokes are the foundation of comedy from the ancient Greeks onwards. You just aren't very fun because someone didn't like his dick joke." And this back and forth goes on for quite a while, even after Drunk in a Graveyard stated that there was aspects of the film that they liked. It just didn't reach the hype that they had been led to believe. He's still acting like a baby, flat out saying things like, "You don't deserve to watch it." I think the most ironic comment being, "Love how you can't handle getting called out on your attacks." Jason, you were clearly looking up Deathgasm so that you could get mad at people who said mean things about it. Like, my dude, you're making movies. People are going to make mean comments about your movie. It's impossible to make something for everyone. People are always going to hate you. People are always going to dislike something that you do. That's the sad reality of life. Like, dude, you got upset with people because they didn't like your pee-pee jokes. That's a bit soft for someone who's supposed to be so hardcore. And again, this is also interesting considering the central point of Guns Akimbo. Those points aren't wrong. There are a lot of anonymous people online who feel so disconnected from the reality that it's another living person that they're trying to tear down. But again, there's a huge difference between senseless online attacks, harassment, and abuse, and calling out things that you don't agree with so that people can learn and be better. I haven't seen online behavior this sad from a director since the whole swipe debacle. So I guess if you were someone who was excited for Guns Akimbo, but you don't want to watch it until you can catch it on streaming, here are some movies that have some like similar styles, themes, editing, filming, different things like that that might be interesting to you. And obviously, these movies won't deal with 100% the same things, but they're all definitely still worth watching. So if you're into the overt on-screen editing that kind of feels like it could be a video game, I would 100% recommend checking out Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Edgar Wright, I think, is the master of that style of editing, and I don't know if it's ever been topped since Scott Pilgrim released back in 2010. Kick-Ass, which handles the vibrant, stylized violence and similar themes of crime and vigilantism. And another one from 2019's TIFF, First Love by Takashi Miike. Don't let the name fool you. This movie will cover the off-the-rails ridiculous violence and humor in an incredible way. First Love is actually super high up on my 2019 movies ranked list, so I definitely just recommend it in general. I had a blast watching it. And at some point this year, the 2020 Sundance movie Spree should get wider release, which I'm super excited to talk about again. Would 100% recommend for another movie that's kind of dealing with modern day internet culture. Now, there are obviously a bunch of other movies that deal with the concepts of like anonymity on the internet, cyberbullying, unseen groups of people voting for horrible things to happen to our protagonists, parasocial relationships, online harassment, the troubles of actually being someone who's online. And I'm sure that trend's only going to continue as those issues become more relevant and prevalent in our day-to-day lives. So that's gonna do it for today's video. Let me know what you guys are thinking in the comment section down below. I just think that it was really ridiculous that this guy started some like unchecked harassment campaign against people who literally had nothing to do with the situation or based on their involvement in the situation should not be called murderers just by making a choice for their own lives. That's ridiculous to me. If you want to call out the anonymous, faceless people that are just spewing hate online all the time, you can make the blanket statement there. That's going to do it. Let me know what you're thinking down below. Hope you're having a fantastic day, and we'll catch you all later.